Okay, in this first problem I'm going to print out a list of numbers from 1 to 100, and I'll use the for loop to help me do that. And the first statement here, I'm going to use I for my counter variable. So I is equal to 1, and I'll end the statement. And to check to see if the condition is true here, the expression is true, I'm going to say, hey, you know what? I is less than or equal to 100 because I want to print out a list from 1 to 100, but nothing larger than that. Another way I could have written this, well, I could have said I is less than 101 and then ended the statement, but I'm going to say less than or equal to 100 and end the statement. Now finally, to update the index, there's a few different ways that I can do this. One way that I could do this is say, well, I want to increment by 1 each time. So I is equal to, one way I could have written this is I plus 1 and close parentheses, but some other ways I could do this, it's a little bit cleaner, a little bit more efficient. Well, I could have said I plus equals 1. I'm going to add 1 each time, or increment by 1 each time I iterate through this for loop. There are a couple of other ways that I can increment by 1. I could say, hey, you know what, plus I. Add 1 each time to I, or the other way I could do that is tag the two addition symbols at the end of I, so either before or after that counter variable. Okay, so next I'm going to open up a set of parentheses, and I'll close out down below here. Now I just want to see what will happen if I call on the console.log function. I'm going to pass the parameter I in and run this code, and it gives me a list of numbers from 1 to 100. I'm going to clear the window here. But I don't want just a list of 1 to 100. I actually have some expectations I'm going to follow here. I'm going to print out the list of numbers from 1 to 100. However, my first expectation is if my number that I'm printing out is divisible by 3, I want to print the word fizz instead. But if the number is divisible by 5 and not 3, then I'm going to print out the word buzz. And if it's divisible by both 3 and 5, I'm going to print out fizzbuzz. Okay, so to do this, in fact, I'm just going to move down a couple spaces here. I'm going to define a new empty variable. I'm going to call it output. You can call it whatever you want. I'm going to set it equal to an empty string. There's nothing inside of this string. Now I'm creating this variable output so I can catch and hold values. Right now the value that it's holding, it's nothing. Another way of thinking about this is, well, I've used the assignment operator here to assign nothing to the variable name output. And after that, I'm going to have to use an if statement. If, and I'm going to look at this first condition here, if, and I'm going to create some parentheses. So inside of the parentheses here, I'm going to write my first condition. I'm going to say if I is divisible by 3, and the way I indicate it is with the modulo or remainder symbol. So if the remainder, after dividing my value of I by 3, if the remainder is equal to 0, then the statement's true, and I want you, the condition's true, and I want you to run through the block of code inside of my curly braces here. If this condition is true, I want to run the following statement. I'm going to append or concatenate the string fizz to the variable name output, which is an empty string right now. So I'm going to run the program, and I can see that I'm still printing out a list of numbers from 1 to 100. But when I come to numbers that are divisible by 3, like 3 or 6 or 9, I don't want those values anymore. I want to replace it with the word fizz. So how can I do this? What needs to change? If I look at the console.log function, I can see that I'm still passing I in as a parameter, but I need to get output passed into there. So let's actually, I'm just going to replace I with output. I'm going to clear the window. I want to see what happens when I run this program. Well, I'm printing the word fizz quite a bit, but I'm also printing out these empty strings. So let's figure out what's happening, what needs to change. Well, right now, I still want to print out the values for numbers that aren't divisible by 3. So the way I can do this is build onto my if statement. I'm going to say, well, if it is divisible by 3, print out fizz. However, if it's not, so else, my else statement, if it's not, let's just print out, I'm going to set output equal to I, my variable I. Clear the window, run the program again, and now I can see I have a list of numbers from 1 to 100. When I come up to numbers that are divisible by 3, I get the word fizz in place, and I'm going to move on to my second expectation. When I run into a number that's divisible by 5 and not 3, I want to get the word buzz put in place of that value. So how can I do this? Well, in between my if and else statement, I'm going to create a new statement, and that is an if-else statement, or an else-if statement. So else if my condition, if the value is divisible by 5, that means that the remainder is equal to 0. There isn't a remainder. Then I'm going to concatenate buzz to my output. That's an empty string above. Great. So let's see what happens when I run the program this time. I'm going to clear the window. And now I can see that, well, I'm printing out the list of numbers from 1 to 100. When a number is divisible by 3, I get the word fizz. When a number is divisible by the number 5, I get the word buzz. But what happens when I run into a number that's divisible by both? 15 is divisible by both 3 and 5. I still get the word fizz. But my third expectation, when I run into numbers that are divisible by 3 and 5, I don't want just the word fizz, I want the word buzz also concatenated onto there. So what's happening here? Let's go back to the if-else statement. Well, if it's divisible by 3, print out the word fizz. Okay, so I run into 3, it's divisible by 3, I'm printing out 3, I'm printing out fizz. But when I run into the number 15, it is divisible by 3. My if-else statement is recognizing this as a true statement. It's concatenating fizz onto this empty string and printing fizz out for the number 15. But when it looks at this statement, it says, hey, this condition's true, so I don't need to look at the other conditions because else is indicating that this condition is not true. So how can I fix this? How can I set this up and still have all of this work out? One way actually that I could do this is rewrite a new if-else statement. So I would indicate that, well, else if my else if. So one way of running through this is by creating an else if statement. So I'd have to start out with an if statement here that said, hey, if my condition here, if my value for I is divisible by 3, it has a remainder of 0, and I'm going to use the ampersand symbol here, or the double ampersand, and I is divisible by 5, there's a remainder of 0 here. And what I'm going to do, you don't have to, but I'm going to house that in parentheses also, just to group my two conditions. If both of these statements are true, then I'm going to output, I'm going to concatenate fizz, buzz to that empty string. And you know what, I don't need that curly brace there. So now if I run through the code to run this program, now I'm printing out the word fizz for values that are divisible by 3, buzz for values that are divisible by 5, and when I get to values that are divisible by both, I'm printing out the string fizz buzz. However, this is a bit clunky. It could be cleaner, and that's what I'm going to start doing now. I'm going to refactor this code. Well, the first thing I want to do is get rid of this first if statement, because I already have this first condition of a number being divisible by 3. So when a number is divisible by 3, I'm going to concatenate fizz onto the variable name output, which happens to be an empty string. However, if a number is divisible by 5, in fact, what I'm going to do is consider that this first if statement is a true statement. The condition is true. And I'm going to say, you know what? If it's not, who cares? What I want to do is say, well, if it's not divisible by 3, maybe it's divisible by 5. If it's divisible by 5, I'm going to concatenate the word buzz onto the variable name output, which happens to be an empty string still. But if it's divisible by 3 and 5, what would happen then? If it's divisible by both 3 and 5, well, first off, I'm going to concatenate fizz onto the variable name output, which is an empty string, and then after that, I'm also going to concatenate the word buzz onto the variable name output, which has fizz in place already, so it actually end up with both in the long run. And I'm going to just drop this else statement at the end. I don't want it anymore. I don't need it. What I'm going to do instead is look inside of the parentheses here. I'm passing output in as a parameter, but I also want to pass I in as a parameter, and I'll display either the output, which is going to be fizz, buzz, or both, or I'm going to display the value for I, the value that I'm on. And I'm going to use the double pipes to represent the OR statement. So I'll either display output or I'll display the variable name I. So now when I run the program, I can see that numbers that are divisible by 3 are replaced with fizz, numbers that are divisible by 5 are replaced with buzz, and numbers that are divisible by both are replaced with fizzbuzz. But this can also, it can still be cleaned up a bit more. So for my if statements, if I only have one statement below, I can actually remove the parentheses here. It allows for a little bit more brevity, and I can be a bit more brief here and clean up the code. And now, try running the program one more time. I still get the same display with less information by refactoring it. So that's just one thing to keep in mind.